Hey YouTube, it's Carrie. I just looked at my last video to see what book I had read most recently, which one I had talked about, and I could not believe how far back it was. Oh my god, I am terrible at this. So, I'm going to try to review very quickly a bunch of the books that I've read recently because, hello, there's been a ton of them. And I'm going to give you just star ratings and then maybe just a little bit about what I remember from these books. If you've watched any of my other videos on how I wrap up what I've read, I don't really go into synopsis just because, hello, that's really easy to go in and read for yourself. But I mostly just give my overall thoughts about it, and I try not to click. I'm in Goodreads, so I'm like looking at the order in that I read these. But I really try not to click on the links and like go back into the books. Like if I don't remember what I read, like clearly that's an indicator of how impactful the book was to me. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna go back. Oh my god. I'm going back to page 6 in Goodreads. Oh my god. Yeah, I read a lot. So, okay, there it is. There it is. There's the end. That's how many books I have to talk about today. That's, oh my god. Okay, here we go. So last book that I had talked about was Nice Girls Don't Date Dead Men, which was the second book in the Jane Jameson series by Molly Harper. Love that book. Love that series. Definitely want to continue on, but I haven't yet. Next book that I finished after that is called Etiquette and Espionage. It's by Gail Carriger. I had read a different book of hers called Prudence, the Custard Protocol. That's where I was getting confused when I started talking about Prudence in the previous review. I couldn't remember which one I was talking about because they're kind of similar. And I had put the second book in the series. This is the first book in the Finishing School series. I put the second one in my wish list, but I don't know if I'm going to read on just yet. If I get notified that it goes on sale, then I'll buy it and read it. But I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, but at this moment, I could tell you very little about it. I just know that it is a school setting, and they're teaching girls how to kill monsters, I'm pretty sure. Next book I read after that was an Audible original called Strong Ending, A Journey from Combat to Comedy. And I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, although I probably should just take my star rating away because it is like a kind of a biography in a way. It's a bunch of people who have come back from service in the military, and they talk about how stand-up comedy has helped them cope with the aftermath of that sort of situation. I don't want to get any of the verbiage wrong because I'm not a military veteran. I'm not connected to anybody who is, and I don't want to disrespect anybody who is in that position. I don't want to say the wrong thing. I thought it was a very good book, but I can't speak to its representation. So I thought it was very good. Next book that I read is called Forbidden. It was by Ted Dekker, Gave it 3 out of 5 stars, and it's the first book in the Books of Mortals series. And I don't remember anything about it. Let's just looking at the cover. I remember thinking from the cover it was supposed to be like a horror book, but it ended up being like post-apocalyptic. Or like, oh, I don't know, dystopia, maybe? Where, it had something to do with genetics. Like, everybody in this world, sorry, my hair is just bothering me. I got it cut so much shorter than it was in the last video. I remember this book was about something about genetics, and it reminded me a lot of the movie Aeon Flux with Charlize Theron. So, if that gives you any indication of, like, kind of what it's about. Next book I read is called Flat Out Love, and it's by Jessica Park, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. I absolutely loved it. I would call it a contemporary, even though I'm not 100% sure what that even means. I really enjoyed it. It was about a girl going to college, and she ends up, like, her apartment falls through, and she ends up rooming with, like, a friend of the family, and their daughter carries around a flat cardboard cutout of her older brother because he's away in military service, he's away traveling the world. That's what he's like, an adventurer, photographer, or something like that. He does something abroad. And her other brother is at home. He's kind of a tech person. And I remember thinking it was really cute, really adorable. emotions were genuine and the characters just felt really real. I liked it a lot. I would definitely recommend it. 5 stars. I put the second one in that series in my wish list as well. I think it's only 2 books. The second one actually follows the young girl from the first book, but I haven't read it yet. Next book that I read was actually a DNF, and it's called No Ordinary Billionaire by J.S. Scott. Gave it 1 star. I think it had very little potential. I think it was about a cop whose partner or whose brother died in service, and the woman who goes to drop off his dry cleaning or do his laundry or something. There's some woman who has to go to his house, and he is such an arrogant prick to her because he's so upset at the loss of his partner, and he turns it like really creepy sexual. Like, I don't know. I didn't like it at all. And like maybe she was a nurse, because like she's supposed to be this like impartial third party, and yet she's like totally turned on by him in like an inappropriate way, and I could not get behind the characters. I don't know how long I lasted in that book, but I did end up DNFing it. Next book is called Garden Spells, and it's by Sarah Addison Allen, I believe. There's 3 names there with 1 comma. I hope I got that right. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I remember thinking it was similar to like Practical Magic, where this town has like a witchy family, and they help influence the members of the community by using different plants and putting them into food, or, you know, helping nudge people in the community in a certain direction, or helping them out in their own lives. I remember thinking it was like Practical Magic in that way, because everybody thinks they're witches, but like it's not confirmed. It's just sort of like spoken behind closed doors, something like that. Yeah. Okay. My hand is falling asleep. Next book that I read is called Baird to You, and it's by Sylvia Day, and I also DNF'd this one. It's the first book in a series. You could tell based on the cover it's supposed to be like 50 Shades of Grey, which I liked at the time that I read it. Now, okay, I know there are issues with the 50 Shades of Grey series. Totally big issues. Like, I can't get past them now, but this series, it was so creepy because it starts out in basically the same way. Like, this young woman goes into the office of this man who is super rich, super powerful, and he is just demanding of her these, like, sexual thing. Like, he just says, like, in a very matter-of-fact way, like, oh yeah, we are gonna be together, like, you are going to be mine, we are going to do this. Like, it did not work for me at all. Next book that I read is called Annihilation, and it's by Jeff VanderMeer, and I gave it 2 out of 5 stars. I was not a fan of this one, although I did finish the whole thing. I don't think it was very long. And I'm pretty sure this was an alien story, like a post-apocalyptic, you know, the world is dead, humans are not the dominant species anymore, and I think it was like a giant alien starfish or something weird like that, but I didn't like it at all. It was just not my kind of book. Next book that I read is called Splintered, and it was by A.G. Howard, and I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. This is an Alice in Wonderland retelling, and I liked the fact that mental illness was touched on in the series. I can't say if it's accurate or not because I don't experience that myself. I don't know if it would be something appropriate for someone who has a mental illness like the ones depicted in the book. I don't know if it's something that would be okay to read, if it would be triggering in any way, but I personally liked it. I thought it was I've had problems with books that are twisted in the past, but Alice in Wonderland is one of those that's kind of twisted to begin with, you know, with the drugs and the talking dancing flowers and the rabbit and the creepy caterpillar. Like, there are bits of it, like, you could tell it fits. Whereas, like, in the past I read Dorothy Must Die, and I was not okay with them corrupting those characters, but these characters in Alice in Wonderland are kind of already there. So I was okay with it. Next book that I read is called The Goose Girl, and it was by Shannon Hale, and I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. It's a classic fairy tale, just a feel-good story. It reminds me a lot of, oh, what's her name? Gail Carson Levine. It reminds me of her stories, you know, Ella Enchanted, or what do I have? Fairest, or The Two Princesses of Bamar. I love those books, and this reminded me a lot of that. You know, it's a feel-good fairy tale. Definitely recommend it. Next book that I read was very, very long. This is probably the longest book that I read last year, because I finished this in November of 18. Yep, this would have been last year. It's called The Persimmon Tree by Bryce Courtenay, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. It was really, really good. I liked it a lot. And if I remember right, it took place in Indonesia, and it was about Dutch settlers and Australian settlers in Indonesia. Am I remembering that right? For most of the book, we're following 2 different perspectives, but it's not evenly split. It's not like one chapter from his, one chapter from hers. It's like 15 chapters from him, and then you get 20 chapters from her, and then you go back to him. Like, it was very confusing, but it was very beautiful, very lyrical, and I liked it a lot. But yeah, it was very, very long. Pretty sure I read other books at the same time. Next book that I read is called Marked, House of Night #1. This is that massively long series that I see in retail, like thrift stores all the time. This is by PC Cast, and I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. It's a teen vampire romance kind of book. I can tell there's going to be a romance in the series, but I don't know if it's actually come about yet. But it's this girl who is marked as a vampire, and now she has to be taken away to school to study to be a vampire? Was that what it was? Possibly. I liked it when I read it. Like, I put the second one in my wish list, and I plan on continuing on at some point, but I know the series is really long, and people say it just doesn't get great at the end, so not eager to read on right away. Next book that I read is called Dream a Little Dream. It is by Kristin Gier. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. And this is about 2 sisters who are exchange students. Like, I don't know if they lose their parents or they just lose their house or something like that, and they have to move. And they start going to a different school. And the older girl, she runs into this group of guys who are... what is it? Something with dreams. I don't know if she dreams one night. Oh, that's what it was. She goes to sleep one night wearing the sweatshirt of one of the boys, and she ends up in the dream, a dream with all of the boys. Like, somehow she connects with them and they're sharing a dream. Oh, I remember thinking it was really cool. If I ever do go back and read the second one, I'm gonna have to reread the first one just to like confirm the details in my mind. But it was such a cool idea, and I think it was done really well. Next book that I read is called Infinity, Chronicles of Nick #1 by Sherrilyn Kenyon. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. This reminded me kind of Supernatural in that it's like a male main character and he's fighting demons and monsters and doesn't really know what everything is. Although, you know, Sam and Dean are pretty well versed in the monster world. And it also has a school setting, but it was like they're sort of like thrust into this new world. Like, the football team are suddenly turning into werewolves, and the girl that he likes is like a demon hunter in disguise. Or it was something weird like that. I remember really liking it when I read it. The characters are just so snarky and funny, but I don't remember many details about it. Next book that I read is called Inception. It's by Bianca Scardoni, and I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. I believe this was another monster vampire book, and I think it takes place at a nightclub where this girl gets a job, and the guy who she's working with is going to be her tutor or her teacher or something like that. regarding her powers or her, oh God, I don't remember. Oh, some of these books are just so similar that the details are just blurring together in my mind. Again, I really liked it, but I don't remember the details. I think the guy that she works with has a really bitchy girlfriend, and she didn't like the fact that this girl was hanging all over her man or something like that. It's one of those annoying characters. I don't remember exactly. I'm sorry. The next book that I read is called Evermore, and I actually DNF'd this one. It's by Addison Noel, and I gave it 1 star. It was just a very unlikable main character, very unbelievable. She is a teenager in high school, and she's incredibly standoffish. Nobody talks to her. She's got her headphones in, earbuds in, and her hoodie on all the time, like she's just actively avoiding people. And she happens to have a best friend who's really chatty and flirty, which makes no sense at all. And then this new boy in school starts talking to her, and she starts like needing his attention, like expecting his attention, to the point when he doesn't pay attention to her, all of a sudden she's like confused and upset. There were so many inconsistencies with her character, I just couldn't continue on with that book. The next book I read is called Tesser, A Dragon Among Us. It's by Chris Philbrook, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Like urban dragon fantasy, modern day, loved it. It's about a dragon who wakes up under the city of Boston, was it? And he crawls his way out of the ground and discovers modern life, and he has the ability to transform into a human form. So then he just seamlessly blends in with the community. And we learn more about like world building, like him and his siblings, and how they have it impacted Earth in general. I love it. I love this book. I would definitely recommend it for anybody who likes good old dragon books. So good. Next book that I read is called Southern Spirits, and it's by Angie Fox, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. And I believe this one is about a woman who inherits a house, and she's cleaning it out at one point, and she swishes water around in this one vase and dumps the dirt out, and turns out she dumped out the remains of her one ancestor, or her one somebody who used to own the house or lived in the house or something like that. And his ghost comes back to haunt her. And he's all pissed off because he's like, are you serious? You dumped my remains in the rose bushes? And he was a gangster at one point, like a suit and tie kind of gangster. Oh, it was so funny reading it. And he helps her just like unhaunt the ghost next door. I'm mixing up my words right now. But I remember thinking it was just hilarious while I was reading it. It was so good. Next book that I read is called Ruby Red, and it was by Kristin Gier. Pretty sure I just read something by her. Oh yeah, she also wrote Dream a Little Dream. Ruby Red, I gave 4 out of 5 stars. And I remember thinking it was really interesting. It's about, the 12 months of the year, and a chosen child is represented by each of the gemstones. And I don't know if it's not like they're all teenagers. It's like some are kids and some are adults, and some are just absent from the world in general. Like they've gone missing, or they've gone... The world building was very interesting while I was reading it. I definitely liked it, but I'd have to go back and reread the first one in order to understand what was going on before I ever started reading the second one. Next one that I read is called Lie or Die, and it's by Colleen Helm, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. This is the 3rd book in the Shelby Nichols series about a woman who was in an accident. She was shot in a bank robbery at the grocery store, and like a bank in a grocery store. She was shot, and in her recovery, she discovered that the injury caused her brain to do something funny, and now she can hear people's thoughts. And so she is the reluctant assistant to a local mob boss. She helps him out and his assistant, and she has her own husband and 2 kids, and like how they're handling this. And this was the 3rd installment of it. I don't remember specifics of what happened in this story, but I love just like getting back to the characters that I really enjoyed from the first 2 books. Next book that I read is called the Frozen Storybook Collection. It's by the Walt Disney Company, and it doesn't have a specific author. I think they just compiled a list of short stories, all dealing with Anna and Elsa and their world. Gave it 3 out of 5 stars. I thought it was very good, very cute. I was listening to it kind of in the background leading up to Christmas, because I started it on December 1st, finished it on December 4th. So it was just something that I'd listen to, like walking around the house, putting up decorations, that sort of a thing. Next book that I read is called Eighth Grave After Dark, and it is the 8th book in the Charlie Davidson series by Dorinda Jones. Gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Love it. Love the Charlie Davidson series. It just came to an end. I just finished book number 13 like last week. Oh, it's so good. As for specifically what happens in book number 8, I have no idea, but I couldn't tell you without giving any like major spoilers away from the earlier books. You'd have to go back and read those. So good. The next book that I read is called Night of the Living Deed by E.J. Copperman. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, and it's a funny, cozy mystery about trying to find the deed to this house. It says it's a haunted guest house mystery number 1. So, as for details, no clue. I have no idea of what happened in this book, other than I really liked it when I read it. Next book that I read is called How to Flirt with a Naked Werewolf. And it's by Molly Harper, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. She's the same author who did the Jane Jameson series, the vampire one I was just talking about at the beginning of this video. And this is about a girl who moved to Alaska to try to just start over completely, get away from her controlling mom and dad, and just do her own thing. And she ends up working as like a bartender at the local like eatery. She cooks food there too. And then one night, a werewolf stumbles upon her door. Turns out it's the cranky, sexy guy that she bumped into on day 1. You know, it's kind of predictable like that, but it's still really good. I remember liking the writing and the characters, that they were really interesting. Here's where I read these books. The next book that I read, the next 4 books that I read were part of a series. And actually today I started reading book number 4.5 in the series. So I couldn't remember how far back I had actually read books 1 through 4. So it's good to see. I found them. These are by Jamin Eve and Jane Washington. I don't know. I think both of them wrote all 4, but they're listed out here in Goodreads as like just under Jamin Eve. The first 3 are, and then Jane Washington is just listed for the 4th one. I don't know why they're listed like that. But this is a series, Curse of the Gods series. The first one is called Trickery. Second one is called Persuasion. Third one is called Seduction. And 4th one is called Strength. I think I'm going to have to go back here and make sure that these are the Audible versions of these books. But I gave Trickery 5 stars, and I gave Strength, the 4th one, 5 stars. So 1 and 4 were 5 stars. 2 and 3 were 4 stars each. I really fell in love with this series. It's also a school setting where in this community, the castes are separated, like servants who do the work and clean up everything. And then students are in training to become gods, to possibly become gods one day. And then like the gods are obviously like head and above everybody else. Like they own everything, they run everything. It's kind of a really unique world. And I'm struggling to sort of pick it back up with the book that I'm reading right now. I'm glad there's like a filler book in between 4 and 5 so that I can sort of like refresh my memory about what happens. And I kind of wish I could just go back and reread Strength, but I remember it was kind of long and I don't really want to do that. So I would definitely recommend it. It's a reverse harem book series for anybody who knows what that would mean. It's a female main character, and she has 5 men who are attached to her and attracted to her. There are a couple different threesome sex scenes with siblings involved, so take that as you will. I thought it was borderline inappropriate, but I still really liked it. So I'm not the best person to judge. I would definitely recommend it. I like the series a lot, mostly because of the world building, but also because of the characters, because hello, they're hot. I'd just say just try reading the first one. Trickery took me by surprise, and I immediately had to go on and read the next three in the series. And by the time I finished number 4, they hadn't yet released an audio books 4.5 and book 5, which I'm going to read back to back now. But at the time that I finished number 4, they hadn't yet released them in audio, so I couldn't listen to them. And I'm pretty sure that they are self-published. I think that's what I remember reading. So they're kind of hard to come by. So I wanted to wait for those whenever they might be available, and they're now available, so now I'm reading them. Next book that I read is called The Princess of Fair, and it's by Nell Stark, and I give it 3 out of 5 stars. This is a female-female romance where one of the ladies is a royalty, and the other one is a student studying at Oxford? She says with a question mark. I don't know what school she was at. One of the famous ones in London. And the two meet and they form a connection. And for me personally, I wasn't feeling the chemistry. I didn't really get it. I wasn't quite there, but I can see the appeal. It was still cute. There were bits of it that were fun, but didn't quite hit the right notes for me. Next books that I read are Plain Return and Plain Choice, books 4 and 5 in a series by Sarah Price, and I gave each of them 3 stars. And this is a continuation of books that I read previously, back before I ever started tracking them on Goodreads or making videos about them on YouTube. It's about an Amish woman who was accidentally hit with a car, who was carrying around a Cuban singing sensation. And the two meet, they form a bond, they fall in love, they get married, and this is how they try to exist in each other's worlds. It's kind of charming, kind of annoying at times. I mean, going back into it after so long of not reading these type of characters, I can see where the flaws are in their characters. And like, if I had picked up book 1 at this point in time, I would have put it down. I would have DNF'd it because I can't stand the way that the characters are sort of forcing themselves to adapt to each other, but because it's not in a cohesive way. It's not in like a you do this, I'll do that, like a compromise kind of a way. It's more of a I'll do this for you even though I'm really, really uncomfortable and you can't see that I'm uncomfortable. So it made me uncomfortable to read. Just going back to 4 and 5. I mean, it ends in a happy way. You know, it's a romance, long-term romance over the 5 books. And I think it did end in a pleasing way, but there were bits of it that I just didn't care for. And the book that I read after that actually was Plain Christmas, also by Sarah Price. Gave that 4 out of 5 stars. I think it jumps about 9 years into the future with their growing family and, you know, coming back to the Amish community for Christmas at home and just finding out what their values are at this point in time, at this point in their lives. And I thought it was also very good. Better than 4 and 5. I did like it more. It was more of an upbeat sort of a book, and also Christmas related because we're coming up to Christmas at that point. I think I finished that on the 18th of December. Next book that I tried to read, I DNF'd it. It was called The Secret of Spellshadow Manor, and it's by Bella Forrest. Gave it 1 star. It was supposed to be a magic school book. I might pick it back up at some point because it wasn't like characters or plot or anything like that were really annoying to me. It was just the world didn't really make sense. And like these kids are just disappearing from town and being kidnapped away to this school. And like the school is relatively nearby, like close enough that they can walk to it, but like nobody knows that it's there. That wasn't really explained. Obviously, probably would have been explained if I'd read further, but I didn't have any interest in doing that. So I'm just like, yeah, I wasn't feeling it at the time, so I decided not to continue on. Next book that I read was actually a paper book. I don't actually read many of those nowadays. It's called The Wit and Wisdom of Tyrion Lannister by George R.R. Martin. Gave it 5 out of 5 stars. It's just a collection of Tyrion Lannister's quotes from the books, not from the show, because that one famous quote that he has in the show, I drink and I know things, that is not in the book. So this is, and it all it does is it has a quote on a page, and then it tells you what book it came from. It doesn't tell you what chapter or what page or anything like that, just what book. And Lord knows those books are enormous, so good luck finding those quotes. But they were really funny because Tyrion is my favorite character in the entire series, both the books and the TV show, which are different. If anybody didn't know, they are different. But yeah, I would definitely recommend it. It was some good Tyrion fun. And let's just keep going. I had to take a second and remove the 30-minute long video from my phone so that I could keep recording. Alright, so last one I talked about was Tyrion Lannister. Next book that I read was called Borrowing Blue, and it's by Lucy Lennox, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. This is a male-male romance that takes place over a weekend of like a bachelorette party. No, it's the wedding weekend, isn't it? Oh my god. It's a wedding party is the main cast of characters. I don't remember if it's the weekend of the wedding or like leading up to the wedding. I don't remember what it is exactly. But the entire wedding party is, it's like one woman and then like her bunch of brothers, and like half of her brothers are gay. And the one brother we're following, his name is Blue, and he ends up crushing hard on one of the guys at the resort where they're staying. I thought it was really charming, really funny. I love the fact that there is no hate in this book. They don't have to put up with any of that because all of the characters, everyone involved is like totally okay with it. I mean, there's one character that doesn't like it at all, but he's generally disliked by, actually I think he's the groom. His intolerance is not acceptable in this community, and everybody knows it, and he just sort of is like okay with it. No, it's not the groom. No, it's the one guy's brother. Oh, I don't remember. I'm messing it up. I'm sorry. No, I like this book a lot. I really had the hiccups before, and they haven't quite gone yet. I think the characters were really funny. The sex scenes were really hot. Oh my god, these guys have sex so many times. And it was actually pretty well written, I gotta say. I would definitely recommend this if you're okay with the male-male romance in books. I know it's not for everybody. Next book that I read, we're getting into the holiday season. This was coming up very close to Christmas, and I started like marathoning the books that I had put aside to save for Christmas, because like you kind of have to be at the right time of the year to read those, you know? Next one that I read is called The Christmas Hirelings by Mary Elizabeth Braddon, and I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. Absolutely loved it. It's a traditional Christmas story. I don't remember when exactly it was written, but it is classic. It's older, and it's about a man who is very lonely on Christmas, and he asks his butler or his brother or whoever's living with him, like, can we hire a family, children, to come into the house for the Christmas season? And these children who were recently, I don't know if like they just fell on hard times or something like that. It's like them and their mom come for an extended stay over the holidays. It was so charming. It was so good. I loved it. This is definitely one I'm going to go back and reread each year around the holidays. Next one that I read is called The Christmas Train, and it's by David Baldacci, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I absolutely love this one as well. Very good, feel-good story about a cross-country train trip and the different characters that he runs into, people who commute all the time, and sort of what this community is like. And it was all about Christmas and feeling good with the family, and like, I just loved it. It was so good. And then I read several different collections of like stories and songs, and honestly, the specifics are going to escape me on all of these, but I did like bits of each one, just so we're clear. First one is called Gather Round the Sound. I'm pretty sure this was an Audible original. It's by Paulo Coelho. Definitely saying that wrong. Gave it 2 out of 5 stars. I wasn't a fan of this. It wasn't very long. I think this was only like an hour long or something like that. But it was like little comedy skits and little songs, and this one was more of like a parody. Like, it just didn't click with me. Next one is called Holidays on Ice, featuring 6 new stories by David Sedaris. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. Again, short stories related to the holidays. Take it or leave it. Some were good, some were not as good, in my opinion, but that's my opinion. Next one I actually read was The Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, and this was read by Tim Curry. And I think this was one of the Audible daily deals that came up around this time, which makes sense. Gave it 3 out of 5 stars. It's just not my favorite story to read around the holidays. It's not like an uplifting, feel-good, cheery family story. I mean, it is at the end of it. Obviously, everybody knows the story of A Christmas Carol, or most people do. But I don't know. I mostly read it just because I really wanted to hear Tim Curry read the book to me. Like, Nigel Thornberry is reading me A Christmas Carol. And I did think his performance was really good, but other than that, I just didn't really care for the story, the overall story. Next book that I read is called Christmas Days, 12 Stories and 12 Feasts for 12 Days. And I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. Again, bunch of short stories. I thought some of them were really good and other ones not so good. But that was my opinion. All right, getting past the Christmas stuff. Next book that I read is called The Watchmaker's Daughter, and it was by C.J. Archer. Gave it 3 out of 5 stars. And I remember thinking it was a unique story. I hadn't really read anything like it before in terms of like, no, I have read it before, because it was a young woman who is facing a sort of adversity in her community because her father died, and he taught her everything that she knows about watches and watchmaking, but nobody believes her because she's a woman and women are looked down upon in the community. So yeah, that part of it was just sort of like frustrating to read. I've definitely read stories like that before, but I don't remember much else about the details of the story in particular. Thought it was good when I read it. Like I said, 3 out of 5 stars. Next book that I read is called Dead Wrong by Leanne Dobbs. Also gave it 3 out of 5 stars. And I remember the main part of the book that I remember are the sisters. They're these redheaded, they're not witches, they're like, no, that's what it was. People were upset because the synopsis makes it almost sound like they're witches, but they're not. They're just like prominent members of the community. And they kind of they dress witchy, or I don't know. I remember reading that in somebody's review, people's review, where they thought it was going to be about witches. It's not. It's just a mystery story. I don't remember the specifics about it, unfortunately. I think it was more of like a cozy mystery. Next book that I tried to read that I could not get through is called Buttons and Lace by Penelope Sky. I gave it 1 star. It should be in the DNF pile. I did not add it to the DNF pile. Oh, I did. Why is it in here twice? It's about a woman who finds herself in debt, and these mysterious checks start arriving. No, that's not this one, is it? Nope, different one. I'm thinking of a different book that I DNF'd. This one is about a woman who is captured, kidnapped, and taken away and sold as a sex slave. And then she is rescued, but her rescuer also expects her to be a sex slave. And that particular part of the story, I'm just like, okay, I knew what I was getting into when I bought this book, because I knew from the synopsis that it was going to have those kind of themes in it. And up until that point, I was grudgingly accepting of it. But when we get to the point where her rescuer also expects her to be a slave and do everything that he says, I'm like, no, there are no redeeming qualities about this couple. Can't do it. Yeah, it's in my Goodreads twice. I have no idea why. But the other one is listed as DNF. I'll have to go back in and fix that. Next book that I read is called Which is When It All Began, and it was by Adele Abbott. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. It is a witchy mystery, and that is all that I can tell you about it from the cover and from what I remember. Because, I read so many books that are kind of similar to it back to back in here. I have no idea what the specifics are. I'm sorry. Next book that I read is a paper book, and it is on my shelf right there. It is Brittany Louise Taylor's book, A Sucky Love Story, Overcoming Unhappily Ever After. I read the paper copy, and I did not give it a star rating because it is a biography or a true telling of events as she knows them. and I thought it was very emotional, very traumatic. And if anything like that happened to me, I would be in the same sort of like upheaval of a situation that she was in. Holy cow. And it definitely explains a lot of what she was hinting at in her videos. And for anybody who has read it, you know what I'm talking about. I'm not going to spoil it, obviously, for what happens. You should definitely read it. I think it's a good book. And there are reviews of people who are like nitpicking her style of writing. Like, that was really not the point of her writing the book. You know what I mean? Like, I can understand wanting to read a book that's well written, but this was written by a YouTuber. Like, entirely by her. Like, she had somebody else help her organize her thoughts, but that's not the point of the book. You know what I mean? The next book that I read is called Clean Sweep, and it's by Ilona Andrews, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. And this is about a mystical innkeeper who keeps her inn available to members of the supernatural community. Sorry, I'm just like messing with my hair tie. I'm not sure why. Like, she has a woman who's on the run from the Intergalactic Federation. Like, they're out to kill her because she caused a big massacre, but they can't find her because she's staying at the innkeeper's place. She's staying at the inn. And this is also a place where a werewolf is in residence. He's not living there, but like, he lives nearby, and he decides that this is his territory and he's going to protect the land that the inn is on, but he's upset because the inn is mystical and like, he can't get in the door unless the inn actually wants him to get in the door. So like, his werewolf instincts are taking over and he needs to protect the place, but he can't. I remember thinking it was really interesting. And there's a vampire that comes to stay at the inn who can't have coffee. Is that what it is? He gets totally drunk on coffee. It was hilarious. I love the world in this book. I would definitely read on in the series. I think I put the second one in my wish list because I'm like, this is so interesting. I love it. Next book that I tried to read, this one I DNF'd as well. It's called Second Born. It's by Amy Bartol. And I gave it 2 out of 5 stars. There were a couple like plot lines that I could have gotten behind, but I remember just not liking the characters at all. I felt like they were very inconsistent, and I did not like the world, and just not interested in continuing on. I don't remember even specifics of like what I didn't like about it. Not like the other dirty books where I'm just like, okay, no more sex slaves. But in this one, I don't even remember in particular what it was that I didn't like. I just not interested. I have other things that I could be reading. Next book that I read is called Hidden Figures, The Untold Story of the African American Women Who Helped Win the Space Race by Margot Lee Shetterly, and I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. Now, I thought this was going to be a sort of fiction story based on fact. What I got instead was more of a text, like a high school, educational textbook. It definitely reads that way. It's very formal. I think this took me quite a while to read, actually, several days to get through, even though it wasn't that long. It was just very dry, very scientific. I didn't understand a whole lot of it, but I had the image in my mind of the movie. I haven't seen the movie, but I definitely want to watch it. And so I was kind of like, okay, at least I have a frame of reference for these women that I'm looking at, and these images that are being described. Again, very scientific. Most of it was over my head. Next book that I read is called The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. I thought it was very good. It's about 2 young people, 1 girl, 1 boy, who are brought forward by their patrons to participate in this sort of magical battle, and the battlefield that is chosen just happens to be a circus. So the 2, he knows who she is, but she doesn't know who he is. They know that they're supposed to be battling. They both know that the battle is going to take place, but only one of them is clear on the identity. And then they just create this beautiful, magical world in the circus. And I thought it was very well written, very descriptive. And it's narrated by Jim Dale, the same guy who does the Harry Potter books. So that was a treat. I was not expecting that. I would definitely recommend the audiobook to anybody who might be interested in this. But yeah, it is very atmospheric, very like, it's not so much story driven. It is very much slow paced, character driven, world building kind of a book. Next book that I read is called Heft, and it's by Liz Moore. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. This synopsis makes it sound like it's going to be about an older man, a retired professor, getting to know his estranged son, who was his child from like a relationship he had with one of his students when he was much younger, an adult student. He's a college professor, but the synopsis makes it sound like that's where the story is going to be building off of, but it's not at all. It's instead building off of the professor's sort of developing friendship with his maid who comes to help clean up his house in preparation for this person coming to visit. And it's also about the boy, the son, the supposed son of this relationship that happened a long time ago, his relationship with his mom, and sort of how he deals with learning about this. It's so hard to describe. It's definitely character driven, character based. I liked reading it. I thought it was very interesting. Like, it kept me focused the entire time because I wanted to find out what happens to the characters. But the synopsis is very misleading. It's not like that at all. Next book that I read is called Carry On by Rainbow Rowell, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. A very good magical school book. Now, I have never read Fangirl. I know that's where the idea for this book came from, but I thought this book was very, very good. But it's sort of confusing. You have to take into consideration the fact that this is like Harry Potter. Obviously, that's what people compare it to. But it's like Harry Potter if you were dropped in year 7. So like all of the fantastic, amazing things that the chosen one has done has already happened. And he already has his reputation and his fan base and his group of friends. Like, they already exist. They already have done the thing and fought all the battles, and like the big battle is still looming, but we're coming in at the last book. So you have to sort of infer things that have happened previously, and we're getting bits of his relationship with his roommate and like how that has developed over the years. So there's a lot that has to be inferred from the text, but I still thought it was very, very good. I would definitely recommend it. It was definitely the book for me. I read it at just the right time. Next book that I read is called Stardust by Neil Gaiman, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. And in my review, I said it is a very, very good book, but I prefer how they changed the bits of the story in the movie, because I think the movie is a very fair representation of it, but they changed certain little bits of the plot line, certain little character traits that just made it flow a little smoother. It is definitely different in the book, but the book is still very good. So take that for what you will. Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe is the next book that I read. It's by Benjamin Alire Sayans, and I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. I remember thinking while listening to this book that the main characters are supposed to be 11, not 16, because the entire time the sentences were so short and choppy and blunt and abrupt, and it was so frustrating trying to listen to that book. I actually had to put this book down several times and read other things at the same time, because I could not just sit and read this thing back to like front to back all at once. No, because the style of writing was so frustrating. I was so close to putting this book down. But at the end of the day, it's a very good friendship story. I understand why it got the different awards that it did, but the style of writing is very distinctive and it can be very annoying in audio format, even when it's sped up. Next book that I read is called Digging Up Mother. It's a love story by Doug Stanhope. And I gave it no stars because it is a biography. It's talking about him and how his mother has supported him all through his career and his relationship with her. And it is very inappropriate, very dirty, very in your face, bad jokes, bad, like, oh my God, she's jerking off a cat. Oh my God, like that kind of inappropriate, like, don't let anybody else be in the room listening to you listen to this book. Like, you don't want anybody to read over your shoulder or overhear what is going on in this book, but it is so funny. There are bits in the middle that were a bit slower because he's talking about like his traveling on the road and doing the comedy, and it doesn't always work, and it's sort of down, but he never lets it like drag his spirit down. And the audiobook actually, it brings in several different narrators. There are bits of it that he goes off script. There are bits of it where he pulls in for interviews, just like, you know, ad-libbed interviews with the people who are in the story that he's telling about. His mom has obviously passed before the story was written, so she's not in it. But then he has his co-worker, his co-podcast host. He narrates about half of the book because Doug says he is dyslexic and he has a hard time reading things. So even his own book, he had a hard time just reading it for the audio recording. So often his co-host for their podcast will jump in and narrate the other bits of it. He's just like, hey, you take over this bit. And then the other guy starts narrating. So it is a very interesting way to read a book. I would definitely recommend it, but you need to be aware that the content is very inappropriate. Next book that I read is called The Fifth Doll. It's by Charlie N. Holmberg. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. It is a Russian fairy tale, and it reminded me a lot of like The Village by M. Night Shyamalan. So if you kind of know what that story is about. This is similar, a village that is trapped and sort of under the spell of this doll maker. It was really interesting. I thought it was very good. The next book that I read is called The Identicals. It's by Ellen Hilderbrand, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. This is a set of twins who grew apart when they rolled a pair of dice and decided who was going to live with mom and who was going to live with dad when they were 13. And the one girl has never been happy with that decision, and the sisters were never close since then, and now we're coming back to them as adults when I think one of their parents passes away. I think their dad passed away, and they have to come back to the same place and sort of confront each other and confront the decisions that they've made, and it was so good. Oh, this is another one, kind of like Heft. It's hard to describe, but it's one of those where the characters are so gripping, they're so real that you just have to keep reading on to find out what happens to them and how they develop, because they're such interesting characters. Next book that I read is Destiny of Dragons by Jack Campbell. It is the 3rd book in the Legacy of Dragons series. 3rd and final book, if I'm reading that correctly. And I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. I really love this series. I love these characters, but it ended in kind of a cliffhanger way. I'm like, no, I need to know what happens to them. You definitely have to go back and read the first 2 to find out, you know, what's happening with this book. I'm not going to give away any spoilers, but it is more slow-paced, world building, character building. Love it. Love it. So good. Love this world. And it is an Audible original series as well. So it's not one that you can get in paper copy. Next book that I tried to read, and I DNF'd it, was a Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court by Mark Twain. And it was read by Nick Offerman on Audible. And I think he was the right person to pick for the narration, but the way that the book is written, even sped up, even slowed down, even like when I'm not focused on anything but this book, it was still difficult to follow the humor and the story and what was going on. It was the one that I could tell if I were to read it, I would have to read the paper copy and I would have to take my time with it because it was good. Like, I can tell there's humor there. There were bits of it that I thought were very funny, but I wasn't following much of it. And at the time I was trying to read it, I was at work, and it's one book that I can't read while I'm doing something else. It's just not going to work. So if I ever do pick that one back up in the future, I'm going to have to read the paper copy. Next book that I read is called Stay, and it is by Serena Bowen and Al Kennedy, and it is WEG's book number 2. This is part of the series where the first 2 books that I read are called Him and Us, and it takes place in the professional hockey community, in Canada. And then sort of branching off from Him and Us were two separate books. Then I think the third book was Good Boy. Loved it because of some of the same characters, and I didn't realize that it was some of the same characters. This one also has same characters from the entire series, but I was not as connected to these characters as I had been to other ones. I don't know if I said I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. It is a romance, and it's in the same world, but I don't get these characters. I don't feel the chemistry. I don't get the consistency errors with their characters. Like, I don't feel like they're consistent all the way through the book based on like the decisions that they're making, and I just didn't click for me. This is my least favorite of all 4 books so far. Next book that I read is called The Monster Hunter Files. It's by Larry Correia, and I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. This is a collection of short stories, and they're all about this monster hunting organization, you know, kind of like the X-Files. And there are stories that were more interesting than others, so take that for what you will. It's short stories, so like each of them I think were written by different authors too, so take that into consideration. Next book that I read is called One Good Dragon Deserves Another. It is The Heartstrikers, book number 2 by Rachel Aaron, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. I absolutely love the first book, and I absolutely love the second book. I don't know what it is with me and dragon books, but like the world building in this series in particular feels so familiar and so interesting, so engaging. I can't recommend this series enough. And for some reason I keep forgetting that it's even there. Like I still have to read on in the series. I need to know what happens. But this was perfect. This is like such a layered book. There are so many different things that happen, world building, you know, getting more characters introduced, and it's still so easy to follow. Like, I don't know if I've dreamt about this world in the past, and that's how, like, I intuitively know what's going to happen in the series. Like, it's so familiar. It's so comfortable. I love this series. It's so interesting. I would definitely recommend it. Next book that I read is called The Secret to Book and Scone Society by Ellery Adams, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. This is a cozy mystery, and I remember thinking, I think it takes place in London, and I remember thinking it was just very charming because this group of women come together following this murder, and they form this friendship. It's just really cute, really charming, and these women have lived together, you know, for how many years, and they never needed to, you know, really talk to each other, confront each other before now, but they now have a reason, and I thought it was very good. I don't remember specifics of the mystery itself, but I would be interested in continuing on with the series. It was interesting. Next book that I read is called The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. This is an example of a sci-fi book that I actually like. Typically, I'm not drawn to sci-fi or action books, like where that's the main focus of the story. I like books that have more character-driven plots, more character development, and this book definitely had that, and I am so interested in reading on to find out what happens. This is about a tunneling crew. They tunnel wormholes into space, and you learn about each member of the crew, little bits of their personality, and sort of their different species, because there's cross-species crew in the ship. And I thought it was so good, so interesting. Like, I can't remember names at all, but I can remember like the different species or the different characters and which ones were my favorite. And that was even so far back. Like, I finished that on January 31st. So that was already, you know, 2 months ago. And I still remember almost everything that I liked about that book. It was so good. I definitely want to read on, but I think when I finish this book, the other ones were not available on Audible, so I'm going to have to see about getting books number 2 and 3. Book numbers 2, yeah, whatever. Next book that I read is called Moxie, and it's by Jennifer Matthew, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, It is a high school drama about a girl who sees an issue with the community and how they treat girls in the school, and she decides to take a stand based on something that she finds of her mom's. And it's saying something when she sees a problem, and slowly the other girls, they start speaking up and saying that this is not okay, this can't keep happening, and it slowly builds on that. And it's not super deep, it's not super political, but you can tell it's still a very impactful book. I thought it was very well done. Next book that I read, another paper book, which I'm pretty sure is in this little stack over here. It's in that stack because I decided I'm not going to read it again. It's called A Book of Spirits and Thieves by Morgan Rhodes, and I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. It is a book about a secret cult and a girl who gets sucked into a book and travels to another land in spirit form, and magic and wizards and all this fun stuff. And I thought it was interesting, but I'm not going to go out of my way to try to find the next books in the series. I did think the characters were good. I thought the story was fine, but not super original, not super intriguing. If that makes sense. It was just okay. It was an okay book. Next book that I read is called Royally Matched, and it's by Emma Chase, and I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. This is the second book in the Royally series. Another book where half of the romance is royalty, and you got to sort of take it with a grain of salt and suspend your disbelief because obviously there's certain situations that would not occur if these guys were actually royalty. The synopsis makes it sound like it's all going to be about a sort of bachelor deal where it's one man and then many women are vying for his attention. But that part of the story is placed so far in the background that it's not even really a plot point at all. Like, I remember being very confused about that. It was just, there were parts of this book that were very good, and then other parts that just did not make sense at all in terms of like the synopsis and what it was supposed to be about. So it just wasn't the book for me, unfortunately. The next book that I read was called The Female of the Species by Mindy McGinnis, and I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. And I remember thinking this was very shocking, very interesting. I could kind of predict how it was going to end because the very first chapter is a girl explaining how she kills a man. And then the next chapter, chapter 2, we go to this girl, pretty sure that's next chapter. She goes back to high school, like nothing happened. And I remember thinking to myself, are you kidding me? This is, oh my God. Like, I was so disturbed by that, and it just sort of like tainted my view of that character throughout the entire book. Like, I understand we're supposed to be rooting for her and like trying to make these friends and build relationships in high school and be a normal girl, but she's not a normal girl. And she's getting away with murder. Like, I don't know. There were characters in this book that I really enjoyed. I liked the story. I liked where it went, but there were also parts of it that were just uncomfortable. Like, I never really sat comfortable with this book as a whole. So I think that tainted my reading of it. Next book that I read is an Audible original called Lucky Suit, and it's by Lauren Blakely. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. This is a book, a very short book. I think it's only like 4 hours long or something like that. And it's about 2 characters who constantly are like miscommunicating with each other or misunderstanding who each other is. Like, they bump into each other in a couple different places, but they don't realize that this boy is actually the boy that I bumped into playing that video game, and this girl is actually the girl that my grandma keeps talking about. Like, it's one of those mistaken identity, miscommunication, missed opportunity type of stories. I thought it was very charming, but not incredibly memorable. Next book that I read is called The Power by Naomi Alderman. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. I remember thinking, I can see how impactful this book is. I understand like what the author was trying to do, but I don't think it's not supposed to be a comfortable book to read or a particularly fun book to read. I mean, there are some very dark themes in here. It's about a certain power that awakens in women, and they suddenly have physical control over everything in their life. And now men no longer have the authority over them because they can overpower them. They can shock them with this newfound ability that they have. And there's a scene where, women have devolved to this point where they're abusing the men in their lives, like raping them and killing them. And I can't get behind that. I understand that's a fictionalization of like the author's view on where a world like this might go, but I think it was inappropriate. I think it was shocking just for the sake of being shocking. Like, it's hard to describe my viewpoint on this book. It didn't hit the right notes for me. It was not the right book for me. Let's just say that. It was not a fun book to read. It's certainly not one I'm going to go back and read for fun. Next book that I read is called Where'd You Go, Bernadette by Maria Semple, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. And I thought it was very good. It was a sort of twisting, turning mystery of like, why did Bernadette disappear? And we're getting these little bits, these little breadcrumbs of the story of her character from her daughter's perspective and from emails and notes written to and from like her neighbors and her daughter and her coworkers and people who knew her. And I thought it was really well done. I would definitely recommend reading the book because I know it's being made into a movie and I'm kind of interested in seeing the movie, but I thought the book was really well done. It was very interesting to read. There are several different layers to it because then you get like her past work history, her current situation where she's in fighting with her neighbor and like trying to fit in with the moms of the community and that sort of a thing. I did like it a lot. I thought it was just a breath of fresh air. I haven't read a book like that in a long time. Next book that I read that I ended up DNFing was called Lamb, The Gospel According to Biff, Christ's Childhood Pal by Christopher Moore, and I gave it 2 out of 5 stars. I think it was a fine idea. I know kind of what the author was trying to do. I've read several books by Christopher Moore, but this book in particular was just not the right book for me. I was raised in a religious family, and although I'm not personally religious, there are bits of this that just make me uncomfortable to read. Like, I don't know. It's either too religious in certain points or not religious enough, if that makes any sense at all. It was just this conflicting sort of up in the air. I don't know. I had a hard time reading it, and it wasn't particularly interesting. Like, there wasn't like one main plot line. Obviously, it's just following the progression of this one character, but there's so many little episodic things that happen. It's just not the book for me. Next book that I read is called The Knife of Never Letting Go by Patrick Ness, and I give it 3 out of 5 stars. I thought it was good. Post-apocalyptic, where all the men in the community can hear each other's thoughts and all the women have disappeared. So it's a different take on that style of book, that genre, but it's told from the perspective of a boy who's like 12 or 13. And you could tell he's a flawed main character. I mean, he's an unreliable narrator. He is affected by his emotions, and that's sort of like drawn into the book. And it just wasn't the right book for me. I can see why it would appeal to people, but post-apocalyptic in general, I've discovered that I'm not really a fan of. And I'll just leave that sit there. Next book that I read is called Lion, and it's by Saru Brierley, and it was a biography, so I didn't give it a star rating. It's about a young boy who gets on a train one day in India, and he wakes up and he has no clue where he is, and he can't figure out how to get back home. He's like 5, I think, at the time. He ends up being placed with a family, and he grows up, and then one day decides, I can't stand it. I need to find out what happened to my siblings or what happened to my mom, and he goes on a hunt to try to find some sort of bit of his history, what he remembers from when he was 5 years old, of what his town is, the name, or, you know, like a water tower or something like that, and he ends up like going on a search to try to find his original home. And I thought it was very good. A peek into the culture of India that I don't think I've ever really had before. Next book that I read is called Girl Logic, The Genius and the Absurdity by Eliza Schlesinger, also a biography, so I didn't give it a star rating. This was very funny and very relatable. I would definitely recommend reading it as an audiobook because she narrates it and then she does her voices like she does on stage. So you could tell like when she's doing her girly voice or when she's doing her manly voice or making little noises, which was just funny. So I would definitely recommend it. Like I said, there were bits of it that I just related to, and I've struggled watching her shows in the past, her stand-up acts in the past, just because I feel like she makes broad generalizations about women, and I don't always relate to them. But there were bits in this book that just struck a bell with me, struck a chord with me, and I totally agree with some of them. So yeah, I thought it was a good read, and I'd be interested in rereading it. Next book that I read, which I actually DNF'd, was called The Assassin's Curse, and it was by Cassandra Rose Clark. I gave it 2 out of 5 stars. I was not a fan of these characters. They were very inconsistent. I feel like the main character was the daughter of several famous, like, assassin pirates, something like that. Like, she's got famous parents who are outside the law, and yet she has no concept of, like, how to stay under the radar or how to run away from assassins that are after her. And she ends up getting tied to this one assassin in particular, and it's like supposedly their love story. I don't know, I just didn't like the characters at all. I was like heavy eye rolling the entire time. Can't do it. Next book that I read is called Red Winter, and it's by Annette Marie, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. And I really, really enjoyed this book. I definitely want to continue on with this series. It is about a young woman who knows from a very young age that she is going to be the future human vessel for a goddess, coming down to Earth to save the world. So she's been prepared her entire life to be this vessel. Like, she's only eaten certain foods, and like she has to keep her hair very long and tidy, and she wears certain clothes, and she's protected, and she is living at this monastery. She's transferred to this monastery where she can be safe, and she runs into a kitsune, which is like a human fox thing. She runs into him, and she learns this secret that they've been keeping from her, that when the goddess descends and takes over her body, she will die. And she did not know this before then, so then she decides that she needs to find out for certain that this is what's going to happen. So she goes on the hunt to try to find another human vessel for a god, to try to confirm that this is what's going to happen to her. And that's where she takes the help from this kitsune. And I love the cast of characters. I love the world building in this. It was so interesting. I definitely want to continue on with this series because I think it's just 3 books. Next book that I read is called Sweet Tea and Sympathy, and it's by Molly Harper. Again, she wrote several other books that I was a fan of. Gave it 5 out of 5 stars. So good. It's about a family funeral home and bait shop. And this woman who has a string of bad luck in her career, and she decides that, you know, she's going to take up the offer of one of her family members to come and work for the family funeral home and bait shop. And down in Louisiana, I think, or Georgia, I don't remember. And she takes him up on the offer. She's like, you know what, until I find something different, let's just give it a go. And just the dialogue, the characters, they're so genuine. I really enjoyed this book a lot. Next book is called Alpha, and I gave it 2 out of 5 stars. I did not finish it. This is the book I started talking about earlier, and then realized I was talking about the wrong one. This book, this girl finds herself in debt, and all of a sudden one day, these just magic checks start appearing in the mail exactly when she needs them. and massive amounts of money, and she decides to start cashing the checks, knowing full well that eventually someday whoever is sending her these checks, this anonymous donor, is going to expect payback for them. And he does. One day some man shows up and is like, all right, hey, you need to come with me right now, you need to pay your debt. And she just drops everything and goes off to find this gentleman that has been paying her the entire time. And she has to do what he says, and now I knew what it was going into it, but I still felt like it crossed the line. It was still inappropriate. It was still, the characters are cringy, the situation is really cringy. I don't know. Take it for what you will. It's that type of book. Next book that I read is called Somebody Tell Aunt Tilly She's Dead by Christiana Miller, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. And this is one of those weird books that I remember thinking the last 20 minutes of the book I preferred to everything that came beforehand, which is bizarre because all these really neat character twists and plot points happen right at the end of the book, and I'm like, no, you need to spell that out. We need to know what happens with them. And so I'm definitely going to read on in the series. I just don't know when exactly. But it's about a woman who moves to Wisconsin, and I resent the fact that this author thinks that Wisconsin is the middle of nowhere. It is not. Thank you very much. She inherits a cottage or something like that, and she goes there, and I don't know if she has to protect the town or protect something in particular. She has a ghost haunting her house. Aunt Tilly is haunting her house and trying to get her to leave. Yeah. I remember thinking it was really interesting while I read it. I'm going to have to read it again before I read book number 2, but it was so good. The characters are hilarious. The story is a bit unmemorable, I guess. Focus. A bit unmemorable, but I mean, I'll just have to go back and read it again. Oh, darn. Next book that I read is called Lessons in French, and I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. It's by Laura Kinsale. And this is a English romance, a Victorian romance between a woman and a man, and the woman is, what is she, orphaned? I think her father passed away, and she's left all by herself, and this boy that she grew up with is now charming and able to take care of her, but he can't because he's got secrets in his past, and she's got this prize bull that she takes care of. It was quirky and different from other romances, Victorian Old English romances that I've read. I remember thinking it was charming. But yeah, the specifics are just escaping me right now. But I would recommend it. I thought it was good. Oh, we're back to page 1. Thank goodness. So yeah, we've talked through quite a few books. All right, I'm going to keep going. I'm going to finish this bad boy because I got to tell you, this was a lot of books to get through. Next book is called Beyond the Veil and is by Pippa DaCosta. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. And this was promising. I like the world. I like the idea of this half demon woman, badass, but her character was kind of inconsistent, and halfway through the book she finds out that these people are out to kill her, and she totally becomes a wimp and relying on the men in her life to save her, and that just seemed really inconsistent with her character. And I remember thinking this doesn't make sense at all. I was not impressed with the overall story of this book, so just not the book for me. Next book is called A Scone to Die For by H.Y. Hannah, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Another sort of cozy mystery taking place in England. Oxford, it looks like, because it's part of the Oxford Tea Room Mysteries, #1. I think I might be mixing this up with The Secret Book and Scone Society from earlier. But it's another cozy mystery where a death happens and then this group of friends comes together to help solve the mystery. This one in particular, this one has a group of old biddies who are sticking their nose in the investigation and trying to find out clues on their own. And at one point, they're trying to be sneaky, and these group of 4 grandmotherly type ladies in their purses are stuck in a broom cupboard. And I remember thinking that was really funny. So I would recommend it just for that. Next book I tried to read is called Them Bones by Carolyn Haynes. I ended up DNFing it after like 2 hours. I had no clue what was going on. I wasn't getting sucked in by the characters or the story at that point. I was just really distracted. I don't know if it was just what I was doing while I was reading it, but I couldn't focus on it, and I decided to put it down in favor of something else. I'll probably come back to that at some point, but it wasn't a bad book, just not the right book at that moment. Next book that I read is called Far From the Tree by Robin Benway. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I really, really like this book. It's about adoption, about 3 siblings who were separated at birth, or separated at the times that they were born. You know, none of them stayed with their mother. They were each adopted into different families, fostered. One ended up in the system long term. And it's how they find their way back to each other and form this sort of extended family. And it really speaks to the different levels of adoption and, you know, how impactful it is. And I thought I've never been adopted. I don't know anybody who has been adopted. I don't have that in my life, but I feel like it was a good representation of that. And I thought it was a very good book. Next book that I tried to read was called Under Lock by Mariana Zapata. I ended up DNFing it, which is a shame because I really liked the book Culty that she wrote. I gave that 5 out of 5 stars last year. This was a 1 star for me. The characters are just annoying. Annoying and like rude to each other and just inconsistent. Like, oh, it didn't make sense to me at all. And I'm sitting there going, these characters are so stupid. These characters are awful. Why am I supposed to root for these characters the entire time? Like, I had to stop reading it at one point. I'm just like, I can't do it. Can't. Nope. Next book that I read is called The Autumn Bride. It's by Anne Gracie, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. And this book has a very misleading cover. And by that, I mean, it's just a very simple cover. Like, it doesn't look like much, but oh boy, this was a fun book to read. It's about a woman who rescues her sister from a brothel and then teams up with like 2 other girls who were also in the brothel. One was a maid and the other one was a girl who's lived there since she was little. And they form this friendship and they're trying to protect each other from the world because, you know, women are disrespected and not appreciated in this world. And out of desperation, the main girl, she goes and climbs through the 2nd-story window of a house nearby to try to steal something to help them out. And she ends up confronting the owner of this house, who's an old lady who's bedridden. And she's having this like pleasant conversation with the burglar who crawled through her window. It's like, oh, it was so nice of you to visit me. And she finds out this old lady is being taken advantage of by her servants and her butler, her manservant, or whatever it is that's like running the house. He says she's fine. She's just, you know, out of the house. She's not available. She's not taking callers. And they're keeping her in just filthy conditions. They're starving her. They're not getting her the care that she needs. And the girl who actually climbed in the window to try to steal from her ends up being the one to save her from that situation. But then she ends up butting heads with the lady's nephew. And it was such a charming book. So funny, so unique from anything else I think I've ever read in terms of like that style of book, that romance, that Old English romance, Victorian romance type of deal where women are supposed to be prim and proper. I don't know what the official term for that type of book is, but this was a breath of fresh air for that entire genre. Next book that I read is called Children of Eden by Joey Graceffa, and I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. This is a post-apocalyptic, dystopian book where second children and beyond are forbidden. Parents are only allowed to have 1 child. And I feel like there were many sort of like coincidences in this book. Just like convenient coincidences. Like, oh, of course, one of the most prominent families in the entire community would have a second child. Of course, that child would be hidden away and, you know, kept from the world. And oh, of course she manages to escape and like not get caught, and she manages to find the revolution all on her own. Like there were bits of it that were just like, okay, really? There's no way that would happen in real life. But I found myself very intrigued by the world building of this book actually, and I would be interested in continuing on. I think I would read book number 2. I think it'd be interesting. Next book that I read is called Wild Trail, and it's by A.M. Arthur, and I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. This is another male-male romance, and it takes place on a ranch, like a cowboy ranch, where each of the men who work there are like ex-cops or something like that. And they are hosting a bachelorette party, another wedding party sort of thing, kind of like Borrowing Blue from earlier. It's another wedding party that comes for the day, for the long weekend, to spend the day or spend the weekend at a cowboy ranch riding horses and such. And 2 men that meet, one who works there and one who's part of the wedding party, and they click, and I don't know. It's hard to describe the different details of this book. Parts of it were very predictable. Other parts are very charming. There's a ghost town nearby. There's a storyline of cop-friendly fire, which I thought was very interesting and added another layer to the story. Overall, it was a fine book. Yeah, nothing spectacular, just good. Next book that I read is called The Fifth Letter. It's by Nicola Moriarty, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Ooh, I just rewatched Sherlock, and Moriarty! That's what it reminded me of. No, but this book is about a group of women who grew up together. They became friends in like elementary school, and now they are reconnecting as adults and sort of coming back together and piecing together their friendship. And they decide that, you know, maybe to strengthen their friendship even more, they're each going to write a letter, and they're going to read them anonymously and try to sort of comfort each other in revealing these secrets, these things that they can't really tell each other out loud. So they write their letters, but then all of a sudden there is a 5th letter discovered, and they don't know who wrote it. This is very character driven, very much focused on their relationships, and you jump back and forth between the different perspectives, mostly following one person as she is confessing her part of this story to a priest in confessional. She goes back and forth, but she's explaining who each of the characters are and what each of them did, and I thought it was very good. I thought it was similar to like The Identicals. It's very character driven, and you're so hooked on these characters that you just want to find out what happens to them. I think I'm finding that I like books like this. Next book is called The Essex Serpent by Sarah Perry, and I actually DNF'd it. But I gave it 2 out of 5 stars because I'm sure it would be fine. I just didn't get around to finishing it. It was just too long and too dry, too slow-paced, too complicated, I think, for me to try to read this and focus on my work at the same time. Kind of similar to Them Bones or A Night in King Arthur's Court or Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. It was just not the right book to read while doing something else. I think if I were to read this, I'd have to just read this and not do anything else at the same time. Like, that would be ideal. You know what? I am gonna call it. This will be the end of the video because I just went back and counted, and The Essex Serpent, that book I DNF'd, will make 91 books in this video. Dare anybody to top that for one reading wrap-up video. 91 books. Oh my god. All right. Hope everybody's having a great day. I am having a great day. My voice is gone. I don't know if anybody else can hear it, but I can definitely hear it. I will talk to everybody soon. I have another 10 books on this list, but I'm going to put that off for another day because my voice is gone. I'm tired. I need to go to bed. But I will definitely share these 91 books with you. Let me know if you've read any of these, if you have any thoughts on these. Leave them down in the comments below. I will talk to you all later. Bye.